Hallowe'en Party. Hallowe'en Party is a work of detective fiction by British writer Agatha Christie, first published in the UK by the Collins Crime Club in November 1969 and in the US by Dodd, Mead and Company later in the same year. The UK edition retailed for 25 shillings. In preparation for decimalisation on the 15th of February 1971, it was also priced on the dustjacket at £1.25. The US edition retailed at $5.95. The novel features Belgian detective Hercule Poirot and the mystery novelist Ariadne Oliver, who begins the novel in attendance at a Hallowe'en party. A girl at the party claims she witnessed a murder, which, at the time, she was too young to realize was a murder. Soon, the girl herself is found murdered, and Oliver calls in Poirot. This book was dedicated to P.G. Wodehouse. A review at the time of publication and another 20 years later both felt this story was not one of Agatha Christie's best, a disappointment. A novel littered with loose ends and unrealized characters. At a Hallowe'en party held at Rowena Drake's home in Woodley Common, 13-year-old Joyce Reynolds tells everyone attending she had once seen a murder, but had not realized it was one until later. When the party ends, Joyce is found dead, having been drowned in an apple-bobbing tub. Ariadne Oliver, attending the party while visiting her friend Judith Butler, calls on Hercule Poirot to investigate the murder and Joyce's claim. With help from retired Superintendent Spence, Poirot makes a list of deaths and disappearances for the last few years in Woodley Common. Rowena's aunt, Mrs. Llewellyn-Smythe, died suddenly. Her au pair Olga Semenov disappeared, when a codicil that favored her in her employer's will was found to be a forgery. Leslie Ferrier, a lawyer's clerk, was stabbed in the back by an unknown assailant. Charlotte Benfield, a 16-year-old shop assistant, was found dead with multiple head injuries. And Janet White, a teacher at Elms School, was strangled to death. Poirot learns a few interesting facts. Judith's daughter Miranda was Joyce's closest friend, and the pair shared secrets between them. Joyce was known to be a teller of tales to gain attention. Elizabeth Whittaker, a mathematics teacher attending the party, witnessed Rowena become startled and drop a glass vase of water outside the door of the library. While the partygoers were playing Snapdragon, Ferrier had previous convictions for forgery, and many suspected that he and Olga were working together to steal Mrs. Llewellyn-Smythe's fortune. A one-time cleaner of Mrs. Llewellyn-Smythe had been witness to her employer making the codicil. A beautiful garden built within an abandoned quarry for Mrs. Llewellyn-Smythe was designed by Michael Garfield, a man with narcissistic behavior. The victim's brother, Leopold Reynolds, has become flush with money of late. Leopold is later found dead, having been drowned in a small brook. Rowena, unusually upset about the death, informs Poirot she had seen him in the library the night of the party, and believes he witnessed his sister's killer. Poirot soon has a theory, and advises the police to search the woods near the quarry. The search turns up Olga's body in an abandoned well, having been stabbed in the same manner as Ferrier. Fearing another murder, Poirot sends a telegram to Mrs. Oliver, instructing her to take Judith and her daughter to London as quickly as possible. However, Miranda disappears when the group stop for lunch, and meets up with Garfield, who takes her to a pagan sacrificial altar with the intention of poisoning her. However, he commits suicide when two men, recruited by Poirot to trail Miranda, thwart him and save her life. Once in safety, Miranda reveals that she had witnessed the murder Joyce claimed she had seen. More precisely, she saw Garfield and Rowena drag Olga's body through the quarry garden and only later realized she had witnessed a murder. Poirot tells Mrs. Oliver what he has learned. While her husband was alive, Rowena began an affair with Garfield. Her aunt discovered this, and as a punishment, she wrote a codicil that left her fortune to Olga. When the pair learnt of this, they plotted to discredit Olga's claim, hiring Ferrier to replace the real codicil with a clumsy forgery that could be easily spotted. Ensuring Rowena inherited everything as stipulated in earlier wills, the real codicil was not destroyed and later found. Both Olga and Ferrier were murdered to conceal the deceit, though Rowena suspected someone had witnessed the disposal of Olga's body. She killed Joyce when she claimed she had witnessed a murder, unaware that she had appropriated Miranda's story as her own. The dropping of the vase of water, which Mrs. Whittaker witnessed, was to disguise the fact Rowena was already wet from drowning Joyce. Leopold was murdered because he had witnessed Rowena murdering his sister and subsequently blackmailed her. With his theory, Poirot muses that Rowena would likely have shared a similar fate to Olga. As Garfield's motivation for the murder was his narcissistic desire to construct another perfect garden with Rowena's money, he would have had no further need of her, as she had already provided him with a Greek island she had secretly purchased. Poirot reveals further that Garfield was Miranda's father. Judith is not a widow, but a single mother. She had met Garfield years before, and encountered him by accident when settling in the area with Miranda. While Garfield knew Miranda was his daughter, he was willing to kill his own child to ensure he could create another garden. Satisfied with his help, Judith thanks Poirot and leaves, though the story ends with a few questions unanswered, including whether Mr. Drake's death was an accident, and if the police took Mrs. Drake to trial. The novel is dedicated to P.G. Wodehouse, whose books and stories have brightened my life for many years. Also, to show my pleasure in his having been kind enough to tell me he enjoyed my books. Literary significance and reception. Robert Weaver in the Toronto Daily Star of the 13th of December 1969 said, "Hallowe'en Party is a disappointment. But with all her accomplishments, Miss Christie can be forgiven some disappointments. Poirot seems weary and so does the book." Robert Barnard, bobbing for apples turns serious when ghastly child is extinguished in the bucket. The plot of this late one is not too bad, but the telling is very poor. It is littered with loose ends, unrealized characters, and maintains only a marginal hold on the reader's interest. Much of it reads as if spoken into a tape recorder and never read through afterward. Superintendent Spence brought to Poirot the case solved in Mrs. McGinty's Dead and which they discuss in Chapter 5. The case is also recollected by Poirot in Chapter 3, when Poirot recalls Mrs. Oliver getting out of a car and a bag of apples breaking. This is a reference to her second appearance in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, Chapter 10. Miss Emmeline mentions in Chapter 10 that she knows of Poirot from Miss Bulstrode, who previously appeared as a character in Cat Among the Pigeons. When Joyce mentions to Ariadne Oliver in Chapter 1 that she should have themed the party around a fake murder in honor of her presence, Ariadne replies, "Never again." This is a reference to Dead Man's Folly, an earlier Poirot novel where she is asked to write a fake murder for a charity fate that turns into a real one. A letter was sent to Hercule Poirot from Mr. Goby, who appeared in The Mystery of the Blue Train, After the Funeral, and Third Girl. Mrs. Rowena Drake is compared to Lady Macbeth by Poirot, while Michael Garfield titles his sketch of Miranda as Iphigenia, reflecting his plan. Mrs. Goodbody, a rich source of local insight, uses a well-known children's rhyme to express her view of the likely fate of Olga, when Poirot asks her in Chapter 16, "Ding dong dell, pussy's in the well." The first half of the novel contains several discussions in which anxiety is voiced about the criminal justice system in Great Britain. This in part reflects the abolition in 1965 of capital punishment for murder. The novel reflects in many respects its time of publication at the end of the permissive 1960s, but nowhere more so than when a character uses the word lesbian in Chapter 15. Mrs. Llewellyn-Smythe placed her codicil in a book titled Inquire Within Upon Everything, a real book of domestic tips published from 1856 to 1994. The novel was adapted as part of the 12th series of Agatha Christie's Poirot with David Suchet, with Zoe Wanamaker reprising her role as Ariadne Oliver. Guest stars include Deborah Findlay as Rowena Drake, Julian Rhind-Tutt as Michael Garfield, Amelia Bulmore as Judith Butler, and Fenella Woolgar as Elizabeth Whittaker. Charles Palmer directs this installment, with the screenplay written by Mark Gatiss, who wrote the screenplay for Cat Among the Pigeons. He also appeared as a guest star in the adaptation of Appointment with Death. The television adaptation shifted the late 1960s setting to the 1930s, as with nearly all shows in this series. Other specific changes include: omitted from the adaptation are the characters of Anne Reynolds, Superintendent Spence, Alfred Richmond, Elspeth Mackay, Miss Emmeline, Harriet Lehman, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Goby, Nicholas Ransom, and Desmond Holland, along with the location of the Elms School, and the investigation into Charlotte Benfield's death. Reverend Mr. Cottrell and Francis and Edmund Drake are new characters to the story. Cottrell ran a program that supplied au pairs, including Olga, which went downhill when Olga disappeared. Francis and Edmund are Rowena's children, with Francis having been involved in a relationship with Leslie Ferrier. The garden in the novel is changed from being built in an abandoned quarry, to being a part of the estate owned by Rowena. Mrs. Goodbody is more involved in the story. She is consulted by Poirot over deaths that happened over the past few years, that could have been murders witnessed by Joyce. Certain events and clues were changed. Joyce's appropriation of stories is revealed by Cottrell. Mrs. Oliver witnesses Rowena purposely dropping the vase of water near the library. Oliver is bedridden for most of the case following the party, until the end. The fake codicil is revealed by Mr. Fullerton, while the real one is found in a picture frame in Leslie's possession. Leopold's body is found by Elizabeth Whittaker, and the scene visited by Poirot. Rowena comes to Poirot twice, before and after Leopold's murder, to give false reasons for her dropping the vase and where he was during the party. Janet White's first name is changed to Beatrice, and her death was a result of suicide by drowning, due to personal issues. She could not deal with people commenting about her sexuality, and so decided to end it all, leaving a note to Whittaker, who had loved her. Whittaker hid the note to prevent Janet being given an unconsecrated grave. A major number of changes were made for the final scene, including the denouement. Judith and Miranda are not taken away by Poirot, but Miranda sneaks out of her mother's home to meet Garfield. Garfield is caught by the police while trying to kill Miranda in a pagan fashion at the garden, and does not kill himself with poison. Olga's body is found after the arrest of Garfield and Rowena. There is no well or knife found with it. The motive for her murder was modified. Garfield was not her lover, whilst Rowena was confronted about the codicil. As Olga knew she must have had it switched for a fake one and knew she was having an affair with Garfield. Her body was buried by Garfield only, witnessed by Miranda, who was visiting the garden at the time of Olga's murder. The death of Rowena's husband is explained in the adaptation as being murder, committed by Garfield for Rowena and blamed on young tearaways. Rowena learns from Garfield the truth, in that he was only interested in the money and making a new garden, never loving her, and thus quickly hates him as a result.